Lookout Mountain Air Force Station, a photographic installation of the Aerospace Audiovisual Service Military Airlift Command, and home of the 1352nd Photographic Group, containing facilities to accomplish all phases of photography. Staffed by both civilian and military filmmakers of the United States Air Force. The administrative function is housed in a portion of this modern building in the San Fernando Valley. A 15-minute courier drive from the main gate. The organization's mission: photographic documentation of Air Force activities, the production of scientific films, technical films, training films, informational motion pictures, for the Atomic Energy Commission, for Joint Army and Air Force exercises, for civil defense, for the Air Force, as well as other government agencies. Films requiring animation may get their start in this division. The artist inking this cell is only one of an experienced team with special skills in all phases of technical animation. The completed cell, as it is finally photographed here, must often effectively portray an abstract or extremely complex idea, the workings of intricate mechanisms or a cross-section of an atomic weapon. The camera division is completely equipped for both stage and location photography. In just a moment, we'll see some clips from documentary coverage and the many productions that have passed through this laboratory. Laboratory operations require a high degree of skill and scientific control to process the many types of film handled here and exposed by not only our production unit, but others dispersed around the world. Sound requirements are fulfilled in a completely rebuilt and modern department, incorporating equipment that will allow technicians to transfer 12 effects tracks simultaneously. How does this all come together? What are the films like that are produced here? Well, here, in one of our projection rooms, let's have a seat and take a brief look at some of our typical accomplishments.
This motion picture was produced to enable you to experience more personally and vividly the most dramatic events of the Apollo 11 story. The pictures and sounds are real, recorded in real time, where the action really was. So, come with us. We are going to the moon.
Hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas and the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor. Kuwait, a member of the Arab League, a member of the United Nations, was crushed. Its people brutalized.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
Today, I authorize the Armed Forces of the United States to begin a limited military action in Libya in support of an international effort to protect Libyan civilians.
We have the mightiest military in the long history of humankind. We have the best and most devoted workers ever to walk the face of the earth. And now we're combining all of these amazing strengths for the most aggressive vaccine project in history. There's never been a vaccine project anywhere in history like this.
Not since President Lincoln and the Civil War have freedom and democracy been under assault at home as they are today. What makes our moment rare is the freedom and democracy are under attack both at home and overseas at the very same time. Overseas, Putin of Russia is on the march, invading Ukraine and sowing chaos throughout Europe and beyond. Just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th, when insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy. Many of you are here on that darkest of days. We all saw with our own eyes the insurrectionists were not patriots. They'd come to stop the peaceful transfer of power, to overturn the will of the people.
Could you describe your emotions as regard that prime human emotion, fear? Do you harbor any fear, or how would you describe your attitude just before flight? Any one of you, or all. Well,
I certainly wouldn't say.
Draw straws.
I wouldn't say, Walter, that fear is an unknown emotion to us. Fear is characteristic, particularly of a knowledge that there may be something that you haven't thought of and feel that you might be unable to cope with. I think our training and all the work that goes into the preparation for flight does everything it can toward erasing those kinds of possibilities. And I would say that as a crew, we among the three of us really have no fear of launching out on this expedition.
So a few days ago, a friend of mine shared this interview from Justin Peters Ministries from it was a 4-hour video titled "Let's Talk About the Shape of the Earth," an interview with Dr. Danny Faulkner and an ISS astronaut. So the first couple hours he's talking to Danny Faulkner, and there was a lot of stuff in here that made me want to respond, but I will limit it to just a couple points. So I'm just going to play a short clip. I don't see any copyright warnings on Justin Peters' channel, so so don't get mad.
All right. Oh, I wish I had a nickel for every time I've heard this one. NASA. NASA means in Hebrew. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. NASA in Hebrew means to deceive. Wish I had a nickel. Does NASA in Hebrew mean to deceive? And if it does, would NASA be so foolish as to telegraph their deception in such an obvious way?
Well, if the Joker or the Riddler were in charge of NASA, of course they would, But real conspiracy people don't leave such quote unquote obvious clues lying around. And in a very, very quickly, one word, no, the word NASA does not mean deceive in Hebrew. The word they're looking at there, and this is where amateur Hebraists can get into trouble real fast.
Yeah.
The word they're looking for here is nashah.
Nashah.
It's a SH sound. It's not an S sound. Nashah.
That's right.
There is a word that actually is pronounced nasa, which is far, far closer than nashah is to the pronunciation of NASA. And it means to lift up.
Yes.
Which is interesting. It's almost like if you're going to admit something, that's kind of a cool thing. So that's just patently false. One person got this notion, went through the lexicon and found a word that resembled, they thought, the word NASA in Hebrew, and ran with it. And this is a common problem with flat earthers. One flat earthers will make a claim, and other flat earthers will uncritically repeat it without checking out the claim first. There's absolutely no kind of quality control in these things. So this thing's been repeated endlessly.
That's right. Two different words. And I've had the biblical languages. I'm admittedly, I kept up with my Greek a lot more than I did my Hebrew, but I remember when I had Hebrew in seminary, that's how I remembered that word, NASA. I'm like, oh, it kind of looks like NASA to rise up. NASA sends up rockets and that's how I remembered that Hebrew word, NASA.
That's how I remember that word, NASA. I'm like, oh, it kind of looks like NASA to rise up. NASA sends up rockets and that's how I remembered that Hebrew word, NASA.
So yeah, I've heard that one a million times too. You know, the whole NASA means deceive in Hebrew. And indeed, that's just one example of hundreds probably of things that get passed around in the flat earth community that they pick apart and go, oh, look, you fools. This just cracked me up because they pick it apart, but they latch onto it like, haha. See, it really means this. It's really much closer to this Hebrew word to rise up, to lift up, to transcend. And right there, I thought, wow, this kind of encapsulates the entire essence of what's really being debated here. What's really at the core. It's not about the shape of the earth, per se. It's about just the broader question that Christians struggle to come face to face with in terms of how much deception could be in the world. You know, laughing at this idea that we could be deceived, but instead wanting to believe that we have indeed achieved all these amazing accomplishments and technological progress. And there's nothing nefarious going on. Silly flat earthers. Okay, moving on.
Now I'm sitting here watching you, Danny, and I just realized there's something on your shelf back there that if I don't address it, I promise you the comment section's going to get lit up. The all-seeing eye in the pyramid. You are a Mason.
Well, it even gets better than that. I have a little jar here, and I've got a Masonic letter opener in here, and I've got some dividers, and I've got a glow ball, and even worse, it says right there, Mason, right on the jar.
Now I know you're a Mason. You're drinking out of them.
You know what I did a few years ago is I was getting accused of being a Mason, so I just set this on my desk and took a picture and put it on my without any comment, just put it up there, and I had a little mannequin that's giving this flat Earth salute thing, putting next to it, and it lit up. People were saying he's admitting he's a Freemason, and the thing is that I had a Mason jar. I mean, that ought to have been the first clue that I'm just playing with you folks, and I'm playing with people on that. But the other thing up there, all-seeing eye, that is several years ago people here at AIG, Answers in Genesis, wrote some books about cults and secret other things, including Freemasonry. And they had a conference that they did on it, and that was one of the props that they had. And since I was getting into the flat Earth stuff, one of them gave it to me, and I just put the prop. Usually, when I do these programs, I'll have these things in the background just as a little Easter egg for people to see. So anyway, yeah, that's I'm glad you noticed it. Very few people notice it, but many times this Masonic letter opener, I'll leave it in the background somewhere. People rarely notice it's in the background. And people say, well, that proves you're a Freemason. Well, actually, this letter opener was from a commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the Grand Lodge of Kentucky, which was in 1950.
Okay.
I mean, how old do people think I am?
Yeah, right.
I have a letter opener, Masonic letter opener, made several years before I was born. So, no, again, I'll repeat, I am not a Freemason, never have been a Freemason. Yeah. But I like to kind of yank people's chains.
So, yeah, that was the part where it got a little weird. Kind of disturbing. Just wow. Can you imagine if, like, somebody was falsely accusing you of being a Nazi sympathizer or a white supremacist or not that anybody's being accused of that these days wrongfully. And so you just decided to, I'll just troll people with a swastika. Would you leave little swastika Easter eggs on your shelf just to toy with people? Just to yank their chains? What about a Nazi SS letter opener? Just leave that lying around. Would you even have that in your office? I kind of doubt you would. In fact, I know you wouldn't. But yet somehow with Freemasonry, even though he explains that a couple years ago AIG wrote a book and did a presentation on cults, and so Freemasonry is a cult, but it was from a 150th anniversary of the lodge in 1950, so I wasn't even born yet. Like, you wouldn't do that with Nazi paraphernalia. But somehow it's cute and funny to just make fun of Freemasonry and to have an all-seeing eye. Like, compared to a swastika, which was adopted by the Nazis in the 30s, that's an occult symbol that is known around the world, that has been part of secret societies and occult symbolism for centuries. Going all the way back to Egypt and the Eye of Ra. And I mean, it really just kind of blew my mind, seeing that. And yeah, there was a whole host of what I would call straw man arguments and debunk. I mean, the whole thing about Faulkner is just kind of, fascinating. And I honestly hadn't even really thought about this guy in several years. And, I made videos addressing some of his arguments in the past, and as well as Jason Lyle, who's also in that video, and the Christonaut, Jeff Williams. He's always got to make an appearance too, to prove that he was really on the International Space Station. And how could a Christian lie? It's amazing that this is even happening in 2024, that of all the things going on, we're focusing on the terrible threat of the flat earth theory that just won't go away, and we got to spend 4 hours debunking it. Like, shouldn't you have debunked it by now? And Faulkner, he has spent so much time knowing all these little ins and outs of the flat earth. He loves to tell people what the flat earthers believe. And even in his book, which I kind of went back and flipped through, which of course on the cover has the disc floating in space. So that right there kind of tells you, yeah, he's not interested in presenting an intellectually honest analysis of enclosed cosmology. And most of his arguments, it isn't even into the second hour till they even get into what the Bible actually says. But most of it revolves around, well, your model doesn't work because, if you had a small local sun over a flat plane, it should illuminate the entire flat surface of the earth. So day and night can't work on the flat earth. So debunked. And it's like, yeah, never mind the fact that the atmosphere, the air, compounds over long distances and would presumably eventually prevent light from shining infinitely far. But I was just recalling back to his answers that he's given many times regarding the whole distant starlight problem, which is a response to the question of, well, if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, as young earthers believe, then how do you have stars shining from millions and billions of light years away? If those distances are accurate and the speed of light is constant, don't you have a problem there with your own model? And ultimately he resorts to saying, well,
creation is a miracle. Mm-hmm. There's a certain point where the miraculous take place. And I think at some point, maybe it's stages, but certainly by the end of the creation week, God went from creating to sustaining. Mm-hmm. And if we try to push back the current sustaining, what we call physics, into the creation week too far, we're kind of committing the uniformitarian assumption. We accuse the evolutionists of. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we seriously underestimate how the miracle of creation, we might as well come up with the physical explanation for the virgin birth and the resurrection. Right. Yeah. So, after more than 3 decades of wrestling with this issue, I finally come to peace with an explanation. And it's interesting that a scientist has come around with an appeal to a miracle. And I'm okay with that.
So he doesn't believe in creation in transit or whatever, but he thinks that essentially God had to miraculously transport the light from the original light source millions and billions of light years away to the Earth by the time the plants and animals. So within a day, whether you want to say it was instantaneous or just really, really, really fast. It was a miraculous intervention of an almighty God, but then he kind of parses it with, well, that was part of the creation week, and then after the seventh day, it shifted to a sustaining paradigm where God was just sustaining the universe, even though. So yeah, the bottom line is that the vast majority of his critiques do not revolve around the Bible, which is kind of ironic when, the name of your organization is Answers in Genesis. It's amazing how long it takes to get into Genesis. But no, most of it has to do with the model and with, does NASA mean deceive in Hebrew and stuff like that. But when you get to the point where you're mocking, you're trolling flat earthers by putting an all-seeing eye in the background and putting Masonic letter openers in a mason jar just to laugh at the whole idea that people will call you a Mason. I'm sure it does get pretty annoying, but if you know what Freemasonry is, and there's no way that these men cannot know. This is the thing that really, I think, kind of makes me stop and just be like, wait a minute. We could just set NASA aside in the entire cosmological discussion and be like, well, what about banking? And the Federal Reserve and private banks systematically plundering the world and putting country after country into debt slavery with the backing of the U.S. military and all the alliances thereof, and this monolithic system that is now essentially on the brink of collapse, and they're getting ready to usher in digital currency and digital ID for the internet and the entire prospect of a technocratic society that is looming before. So go ahead and laugh at the flat earth, but it's just amazing here in 2024 that you're busy laughing at conspiracy people when you've just watched people be locked inside their homes and the streets were empty, and Operation Warp Speed. And the results of Warp Speed have come out in pretty warp speed time. And just the implications of that alone. The double standards are kind of mind-blowing, especially, when it's like you've already established that basically your answer for the distant starlight problem is because God. That's your answer. Because God. Because that's how we did it. That's how we made it. Which, of course, the evolutionary cosmologists scoff at and laugh at, and they do not accept that is an answer, but that's not so it's an acceptable answer for you. You've painted yourself into an interesting little corner with that. The reality is that we've all been born into this modern society that has been shaped by all kinds of occult influences and doctrines of demons and institutions and generations of planning and cinematic mind control. One way or another. And it's something we all have to come out of. And for the people who refuse to come out of that in any way, shape, or form, and want to just believe that everything you've been shown and taught your whole life is, particularly in America, I think people struggle with this. Because, what the flat earth does, doesn't only just challenge, what you think you learned in grade school and what everybody knows to be true and science, all that, but of course, to even give it any serious consideration, it would imply that there's cooperation on an international level that would instantly nullify all these other narratives about wars and competition between superpowers and these different nations, that there's something behind the scenes. All these wars and health crises and mass migrations and social upheavals and economic catastrophes and of course when you see the answer, it's very simple, and it's like, how many different ways can you kind of point people to the same thing? That they've been working on implementing a one world government and a one world religion for a long, long time. And all these other deceptions and staged events and lying signs and wonders of many kinds, they all feed into that agenda one way or another. And when I think about all the space propaganda, even though, yes, it totally ties into evolution, obviously, you need a massive universe billions of light years across to even argue for the Big Bang and all that, but that's just kind of the starting point. But it's so much more than that. When you look at all the International Space Station, and they've been up there since 1998, never had an accident or anything like that. It's an amazing piece of machinery you got there at 17,000 miles an hour. And lots of hairspray. But yeah, you sleep in this tiny little cocoon. You sleep in a closet. You eat food out of a tube. You drink your own recycled urine. You're in a completely artificial environment for extended periods of time, surrounded by technology, connected to your loved ones via satellite uplinks and the internet, doing science. And all of it, to me, it's just like, yeah, this is eat the bugs, man. This is World Economic Forum propaganda before anyone ever heard of the World Economic Forum. But the only thing that makes it cool is that it's in zero gravity. And that's why that's the only thing they ever focus on. In all of their years and years and years of broadcasts and interviews, it's like, look at me floating in space. Like, at what point does that just get, like, ridiculously transparent that's the gimmick? That's what it's all about. That's what they got. We got zero G everything. What haven't we done in 0G? But all the while glamorizing living in a shoebox. You know, basically living in a pod with other people. And there's transcendence for you. So yeah, if you want to believe in a globe and insist all this footage is true and they're really going 17,000 miles an hour, free-falling in a circle, you know, knock yourself out. But this whole question of globalism, it's there no matter what. But the scope of it, the scale to which the political system, economic system, the corporate grip over the world, you know, it's not hard to understand why people don't want to. You get to a point where it's like, you either believe what the Bible says about the God of this world, and you look around you and you see a million pieces of evidence of a satanic conspiracy that involves not just mortal men, but fallen angelic beings, fallen demonic spirits who've been around since the beginning of our history, wanting to pull us away from God, wanting to get us to believe a false gospel, trying to convince us to come together and build a tower and reach the heavens. It's a pretty old story, but we're still living in it. It didn't all fade away into the past, and we've entered this new rational era of science and Judeo-Christian morality fused with Enlightenment philosophy, and yeah, we're not just debating models here. It's narratives. Deep, elaborate narratives of which we've all bought into, subjugated into a cinematocracy. We've all been conditioned over the past 100 years into moving into the cities and striving to survive in an artificial world, eating processed food, connecting to everyone via the internet. And I would say that trajectory has not lifted us up. Sure, the internet's amazing and how we can communicate, and more than anything else, we can share the gospel to people in places that maybe wouldn't have heard it or wouldn't have had access to the Bible and teaching and all these discussions. I mean, this is the weird irony of the internet, is that, you know, the very thing that allows us to now go back and scrutinize all this footage and all this propaganda and all this history is the same thing that is bringing about a level of tyranny that the world has never seen before. Levels of mass mind control that the world has never seen before. You know, really witchcraft on a scale that has never been seen before. Yeah, and that's why I just, scoffing at the occult and scoffing at secret societies and witchcraft, and like, I implore you, regardless of what, if the flat earth is too much, then, you know, fair enough, then just concentrate. Is the spiritual realm shaped like a globe? You know, does your model actually really matter when it comes to the spiritual realm? We're talking about the physical realm, but the thing about the flat earth is that it kind of blurs, it starts to make you stop and go, you know, what is the overlap? What is the interface between the earthly things and the heavenly things? The luminaries above and all the creatures that are down here on the ground. And there has been an overlap, an interaction for all of human history, and that hasn't waned either. So part of becoming, an enlightened, modern, educated Christian has essentially to effectively regard the spiritual realm as superstition and silly old-fashioned thinking. But that's the crazy thing, is when you start looking into all these people creating all these societies and all these globalist institutions and everything, is that they actually do believe in the spiritual realm, and you're not just surrounded by some secular world that has rejected God and lives for themselves, and it's just kind of everyone going their own way. I mean, that's a big part of the reality, but yeah, Satan's kingdom. NASA is just one tiny little piece of Satan's spiritual industrial complex. And speaking of NASA and the spiritual deception complex, I found it interesting that they basically made a movie trailer for this eclipse that everyone's getting all hyped up about, as though it was some kind of cinematic production.
When you experience an eclipse, you feel that connection with space.
Oh my gosh!
Oh, look at the ray structure!
The universe is out there and it's affecting us. We are in space.
And here it comes, there's the diamond ring. And that is the most spectacular sight.
If you haven't seen it, you haven't seen anything.
And so yeah, there's been so much talk about all the coincidental events that are going on along with this eclipse. Everything from CERN to the NASA rockets being fired. They're going to fire NASA rockets into the path of the eclipse to study the electromagnetic dynamics in the ionosphere. And so yeah, if there's any weird power outages or internet outages, then it wouldn't shock me at this point, I will admit. But overall, the thing does feel like it has all the hallmarks of a ritual, telling everyone to put their special glasses on to stare at this amazing thing in the sky, or, then all the fear, and, maybe we're all being internet trolled, and if nothing else, the fear itself is definitely, it's always a psyop involved with that. And then, there's, the serpent deity, and there's so much stuff you can get all wrapped up in, and maybe the whole thing will just come and go, and we'll just be on to the next ritual. But I was reading an article on ChristianObserver.net, where she kind of does an overview of all the crazy speculation and narratives going on tied to this eclipse. And then she gets back into what I was just talking about in terms of the physical and the spiritual. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it here. But what I want to point out is the spiritual and physical nature of the creation, because this is where naturalistic science loses all footing, as naturalism itself is a mystic teaching. Did you know that? I'll turn to the Collins brothers to explain. Scientific terminology supplanted the overtly mystical vernacular of the elite's occult doctrines and became the chief facilitator of humanity's deification. Quoting Jim Keith, "Now the Illuminati restored their waning dominance with their promotion of the arcane wisdom of Bunsen burners, stupefying mesmerism and electricity, and they no longer, at least at the present time, needed to draw their powers from mystical associations of stars and planets. Their vision of the universe and society became the predominant worldview. The main tenet of their new religion, science, was that whether you understood it or not, it was always right. Not so different a creed than the programs that preceded it." That's Keith from Saucers of the Illuminati. The official state-sanctioned religion of this theocracy was scientism. In his article, The Shamans of Scientism, Michael Shermer described scientism as, quote, "a scientific worldview that encompasses natural explanations for all phenomena, eschews supernatural and paranormal speculations, and embraces empiricism and reason as the twin pillars of a philosophy of life appropriate for an age of science." Twin pillars of empiricism and reason. At the heart of the Promethean faith is the belief that the investigational methods of the natural sciences should be ecumenically imposed upon all fields of inquiry. This is scientism. This epistemology ostensibly eschews the supernatural and the mystical. Yet paradoxically, scientism is underpinned by two forms of mysticism, empiricism and materialism, While this new theocracy is veiled in secularism, it must be understood that the new state-sanctioned institution of knowing was and is a form of mysticism akin to its religious progenitor. Daniel Pusner explains how materialism qualifies as a form of mysticism. The materialist is the mystic who believes in existence without consciousness and preaches subordination to a vague and unaccountable, quote, society, variously called public interest, the people, world opinion, the common good.
Well, sir, what do you think about this achievement of the Russians?
I think it's a remarkable thing. My only regret is that we couldn't get there first.
What do you think this is going to be due to our prestige?
I don't think it's going to enhance it any at this time, but I imagine we will be able to catch up and maybe even surpass them on the way.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's frightening. We should find out what they're doing that we're not doing, and we should do something about it very quickly.
What do you think?
Well, I think Russia's accomplishments are greater than ours, and I'm not too disturbed about it, but I feel that the United States will succeed eventually in putting a man into space.
And you?
Well, I think that, Russia's getting into space really bothers me, because it's making the Cold War between Russia and the United States, more intense. There's going to be more tension in world peace.
I doubt whether this was actually accomplished. The man seemed to be hidden for 2-3 days, and they could say anybody did the situation. If they actually accomplished it, they would have announced it immediately.
What is your feeling about this Soviet accomplishment?
Well, as usual, they're ahead of us, a little step ahead. But that doesn't mean much, actually. It means that they took the risk that we didn't dare take, probably, because it's too dangerous for a man.
You're not particularly worried about their getting there first?
The world has always been on the edge of catastrophe since it exists. I don't think it's much worse now than it has ever been. If you read the history, you see every generation has a terror of being destroyed completely or something like that. I mean, nowadays it's exactly the same with a little more, actual danger, because the scale is much larger.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It was at the Holloman test track where we photographed this chimp's preparation and test for the accelerated G's with which man has moved out into space. Using a special mount developed at Lookout Mountain, we recorded his high-speed run on this test sled. And we photographed this rocket launch at a slant range of 100,000 feet over the Pacific Island testing range. We also recorded the zero launch of an F-100 from its trailer bed. At times, cameras are run at high speed to record spectacular events like this napalm attack on a simulated Cuban Missile Guidance Control Band. The result? Slow-motion photography for operational analysis personnel of the Tactical Air Command.
in cities like Dallas, Indianapolis, Cleveland, and Buffalo. In all, about 31 million people live in the path of totality, with millions more expected to travel to see up to 4 minutes of daytime darkness.
Scientists are saying it could be the biggest eclipse cloud of fatality ever in North America.
Niagara Falls joining a growing list of cities that have already declared a state of emergency. to allow for more resources ahead of the astronomical event.
We are preparing for up to 1 million people visiting the city at the same time, which would be a record crowd.
Officials are burning in daylight preparing. Residents in parts of Texas, Arkansas, and New York State being warned of potential shortages on food and fuel as the solar surge is expected to take over rural towns.
We're discussing what kinds of access they were saving up for.